Yeah, I slid the pit.
Unfortunately, it was not. We forgot to hit the record before that started, so I apologize. But we'll see if we can get David and Jay to go back and record something. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Again, apologize that we did not record that first session. We'll see if we can get them to go back and put something together for everyone to have that information available. I want to turn this over to Ashley Kemp. Ashley has been a speaker, I believe, almost every year that we've done the Learning Lab because we want to make sure everyone follows the ethics laws. Ashley managed to survive the Capitol and just recently retired as the Ethics Commission Director and will be moving into future endeavors. So I want to turn this over and let her make this your last unofficial duty as the Ethics Commission Director, making sure their advocates are following the laws.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I've done this a few years now. Had to update my PowerPoint slide to take off my last title for today, but I got it done. Joe, is there a way for me to share my screen? I'm not seeing that.
Christine will give you the screen sharing capabilities.
Okay, perfect.
You should be good to go.
All right. Yeah, I'm not seeing that option.
I just made you a co-host.
Okay. It's still not showing as an option. I can go ahead and talk through. It won't be quite as good.
Email it to me and I'll put it on my screen if you want.
Oh, that'll be great. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. You'll want to copy anyway, I'm sure. Joe, I don't have your email address, I just realized.
jdorman@oica.org.
Okay, I just sent it. And so I'll go ahead and get started when you can get that uploaded, and let me know when you have it and we'll get caught up. So I want to start off by talking about like the takeaways I want everybody in attendance here to have today. And first, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between advocacy and political activity and what nonprofits and charitable organizations can really engage in comfortably, and maybe some things they need to be a little need to be aware of. We're going to talk about what lobbying actually is and who in Oklahoma are considered lobbyists, and then we're going to talk about the types of activity that are regulated, the requirements under the law that you need to be aware of, and how to report and view reports in the Guardian system. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little about resources and where you can go to find the information I'm going to be discussing, and then also other information. You always need to have really good resources to be able to engage in any of this activity. So I just got to bounce back, Joe. So let me try that again.
I've got it in the chat too, if you need just copy and paste.
Yeah. Okay. So first, let's talk about money in politics and in lobbying and advocacy just in the state of Oklahoma. A lot of money gets spent, obviously, to get somebody elected to office, and a lot of money gets spent in trying to advocate and lobby for the state of Oklahoma. And the state actually tracks a lot of that activity, almost all of the campaign activity, and most of the advocacy. But in 2022, just to get an idea of the numbers, just the calendar year, not the entire 2022 election cycle, over $150 million in campaign specific transactions occurred that were reported to the state of Oklahoma. That's over 300,000 transactions, and that's just campaign specific. As for lobbying expenditure and advocacy, over $500,000 was spent during calendar year 2023 on state officers and employees, primarily legislators and legislative staff, by 600 lobbyists representing over 1,000 lobbyist principals in the state of Oklahoma. Again, just calendar year 2023, over $500,000. And that was spent specifically by lobbyists and their clients on meals and small gifts for the legislators. So in Oklahoma and in most states and at the federal level, there's this big drive for transparency for money in politics. And a lot of that's required because of the Internal Revenue Code has specific requirements in there, but also it's a nod back to the fact that all this money that is being spent is to influence government action in some way. Who's being elected to represent the citizens in state office, who is trying to effectuate change in government policies. And that's information that's extremely valuable to the citizens in the state of Oklahoma. And the Oklahoma specific activity is reported on the state of Oklahoma's campaign finance, lobbyist expenditure reporting website, guardian.ok.gov. Oh, yeah. Joe, I'm not sure why that hasn't come through. me try
I'll
using.
I'll shoot a different email to you and see if it'll come through that.
Okay. My apologies. I should have had this over to you earlier, but I thought the screen share would work just fine.
We'll adapt and overcome.
We will indeed. I'll go ahead and get this loaded up until I get your email. I'm not really sure why that's not working. So
We can always email out the presentation to everybody after you're done.
yeah, we will. I'm going to send it from another email out. Okay. Oh,
Just came through.
it did? Okay, then I can quit typing. So if you want to view all of that information, the state of Oklahoma did a really good job in getting a system put online back in 2015 for all of that reporting, and is instantly viewable without having to register with the state or having to register to use the website, and that's called the Guardian system. And it's accessible directly from the Ethics Commission website, or directly at guardian.ok.gov. It is actually named in recognition of the statue that stands on top of the state capitol, overlooking and protecting the state capitol, called the Guardian. Yeah, if you'll advance a couple more slides, I think we're 2 or 3 after. Okay, go to the next one right there. So let's talk for a second about advocacy and political activity and why that's really important and why you should care. So the IRS requires everything to be subject to tax unless a specific exemption applies. And for nonprofits, including charitable organizations, there are specific sets of tax laws that you're required to comply with. And it is not a one-size-fits-all set of laws. There are specific requirements that apply to 501c3s or 501c4s, etc. For 501c3s in particular, it's extremely important to understand where those tax restrictions are, because your tax exemption status strongly relies on it. And so one of those things is that 501c3s may engage in advocacy, but they're really strictly limited to what type of political activity they can be involved in. And that political activity, if it's deemed that the organization is involved in it, may very well jeopardize the tax exempt status. So one of the resources you need to be familiar with are the IRS website itself. It can be a little bit hard to navigate, but they've really made some efforts to simplify it over the last few years. And one of the resources I've pulled, which is on this slide, is a mini course they have available specifically on political campaigns and charities and how all of that works. It's a great course. I went through it yesterday, and we're going to talk just a little bit about a couple of the things that are on there, but you need to care about that distinction of advocacy for your issues, the issues that you're concerned about, versus political activity to preserve your tax exempt status. So moving to the next slide, the permitted advocacy. You can obviously educate and inform the public on the issues that your organization, that's part of your mission, right? You can advocate for the things that facilitate the mission of your organization. You cannot use advocacy as a way to get around political restrictions. So some of the political activity that's prohibited and that the IRS is watching out for is, it's the pretty clear, straightforward stuff, of course, the making and solicitation of contributions, using your own resources to engage in political activity, endorsing candidates, distributing partisan campaign literature. And one of the reasons you need to be concerned about this and just be aware of it is sometimes, and Joe and I were talking about this, I don't know, a week or so ago, about how sometimes you yourself, a staff member, can become so intertwined with the organization itself that it's hard to distinguish the two. So are you talking on your own, or are you talking on behalf of the organization you represent? And so you need to be mindful of that. And while some of the restrictions are fairly straightforward and seem like they would be easy to comply with, some of them are less so, and it gets tricky pretty quickly. Joe, if you want to advance to this next one. So, for example, mentioning a candidate for public office is one of the red flags the IRS indicates in the mini course that I had highlighted. Mentioning a candidate for public office, that makes it somewhat difficult because in Oklahoma, most candidates are in fact, most legislators, are actually candidates, even if they're not in the current election cycle. In Oklahoma, you're a candidate if you have filed a statement of organization. Expressing approval or disapproval of a candidate's position, again, that's hard when a candidate may also be a legislator under Oklahoma law. Materials that are published during a political campaign, that can be difficult when you have obviously an election year like 2024 is, and it's legislative session. Another flag, mentioning voting or an election and raising issues on which candidates disagree. So you have to be able to show if this is the type of activity you're engaged in. One of the things you can do to protect yourself is show that the statements that you are making, your organization is making, relate to an event other than an election, such as a scheduled vote on specific legislation. So my suggestion is this: when you're engaged in, especially during session, and you're advocating different positions they touch on and they're involved in legislation and things you need the legislature to vote on, and especially in Oklahoma where shell bills are used, last minute committee substitutes are used, you don't always know what's coming up during a committee hearing, it's not always as clear as you would like it to be. Just keep notes, keep track of why you're sending out specific emails. It doesn't, or specific information. It doesn't need to be anything big. Just be able to show that it is specifically related to something that you believe the legislature, either as a whole or a specific committee, may be voting on. Moving on, beyond the IRS, one of the things beyond the IRS, advocacy, political activity in the state of Oklahoma is regulated by the Ethics Commission, is regulated by the Attorney General, is regulated by the district attorneys. And so, let's see. To advance the slide, we have civil penalties that are applied by the Ethics Commission. And really, the Ethics Commission in the state of Oklahoma is kind of an odd constitutional entity that really is solely involved with and concerned with state campaigns, the conduct of state officers, employees, and those that interact with them, such as lobbyists. So the Ethics Commission writes the laws of the state of Oklahoma that have civil penalties applied. It investigates the violations, and it can prosecute violations of its own rules in district court. On the criminal side, the district attorneys and the attorney general's office can investigate, and prosecute the criminal laws of the state of Oklahoma. And why it's important for you to be aware of that is most of the criminal laws in the state of Oklahoma that have to deal with campaigns or have to deal with advocacy are built off of the ethics rules of the state of Oklahoma. They've incorporated by reference a substantial part of the ethics rules. So if you're familiar with the ethics rules, you'll be familiar with quite a bit of the conduct of which the state is concerned that may subject you to either civil or criminal penalties. So next slide. The first real issue that you want to be aware of is the blackout period that starts today, the first Monday in February, and will continue through 5 days after sine die adjournment of the 2024 legislature. This is a provision that applies only in the criminal code. So if you violate this one, it's going to be addressed by the district attorneys of the state or the attorney general's office. It's very straightforward. Lobbyists cannot make political contributions to legislators and legislative candidates during this blackout period. And legislators and candidates for legislative office cannot accept them. It's a dual prohibition. Criminal penalties apply. It does not apply to a political action committee contribution unless that PAC has a lobbyist or the organization with which they're affiliated has a lobbyist. That may also be a questionable scenario, but just be familiar, there's a blackout period. Political contributions by lobbyists are not allowed during this time frame. The next slide talks about the Ethics Commission and its website. So the commission is very, very small in the state of Oklahoma. I think right now it has either 5 or 6 employees at most, and it has a huge job to do for the state. And so the commission staff over the last decade has been very concerned with putting most of its resources online and creating a space for those it regulates to come and get not just the law, but explanations on the law, why it applies, what's the purpose behind it, and also how those rules apply to specific fact situations. And you'll find all of that here. And on the next slide, you'll see, like, specifically for lobbying and advocacy, you have, if you click on this lobbying word on the website, it will take you to the actual lobbying page, which is just a one-stop shop for lobbying. Joe, can we advance the slide? You can go ahead and advance too if you want. And it shows like this actual lobbying guide, and this is meant to be used interactive electronically, where it explains the ethics rules of the state of Oklahoma in plain language, but then has a hyperlink right after it that you can click on to see the actual text of what's being described. It also has concrete examples that occur fairly routinely with the commission and with the ethics rules, so you can see very quickly how those apply. But it's a great resource that says it was updated in 21-22. All of those laws are still in place. They have not changed. And it is a new guide. It was rewritten at that time to be more user-friendly. So if we advance, what actually is lobbying in the state of Oklahoma? It's oral and written communications on behalf of a third party called a lobbyist principal for compensation. In Oklahoma, that for compensation is very important. A lot of states have you register as a lobbyist if you're advocating on behalf of a third party, regardless of whether or not you're compensated, but not in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, you'd only become a lobbyist once you're actually compensated. And that's going to be it's a very broad definition to include any type of advocacy or communications about legislation, rules, rates, executive orders, or any policy or position of the state. And in Oklahoma, we have 3 types of lobbyists: legislative lobbyists that lobby only at the legislature, executive lobbyists that lobby executive branch agencies, and then Legislative liaisons is the term that's used for state employees that engage in lobbying activity on behalf of their agency. When this rule says for compensation, it doesn't necessarily just mean a salary. If you're not being paid a salary or a stipend, but you are being reimbursed mileage or meals to offset your costs, that may very well be compensation that would require you to register as a lobbyist in the state of Oklahoma. Who are not lobbyists is on the next slide, and that's individuals not compensated, federal officials acting in their official capacity. And this third exception, which creates a lot of questions, it says individuals whose lobbying activities are only incidental to the services provided by the individual to their client. This, to be very clear, this is not a threshold. This is not establishing a threshold of lobbying activity or compensation. If one of your tasks for your client is to lobby, you have to register as a lobbyist. It doesn't matter if you're only at the Capitol one time. It doesn't matter if you're never at the Capitol and you just send some emails. If that is in fact one of your responsibilities, it doesn't matter how big of a part of your job duties it is, you're going to be required to register. It's really for situations where somebody whose job duties it isn't just happens to make a comment and a legislator happens to be there nearby. So it's really kind of a safety net for others who may technically be engaging in lobbying accidentally, not on purpose. A lobbyist principle is our next slide, and that's just the clients. It's just the term of art that's used in the state of Oklahoma to describe the clients, somebody that retains a lobbyist to advocate on their behalf, and this will include a state agency as well. We can skip 2 slides since we're getting a little short on time. When you go to lobby, if you are a lobbyist, even if you're not a lobbyist, but you're advocating on behalf of somebody else without compensation, the ethics rules require you to identify yourself and the client on whose behalf you're lobbying to that state official. So the example, hi, I'm Jane Smith, a lobbyist for XYZ Inc. If you have multiple clients, you'll want to identify on whose client's behalf you are speaking with that specific legislator about, and maybe what the potential bills are. If you don't identify yourself, under the law, they have the right to ask you if you're a lobbyist and who you represent. And by law, you have to tell them. So this is really to help the state officials identify who are the lobbyists in the state of Oklahoma. And when you're talking with them, are you being compensated to do so? Are you representing somebody's interests other than your own? Going to the next slide, we'll talk about the Guardian system real quick. If you need to register, you're going to do that within 5 days on the Guardian system. And Joe, let's go ahead and advance a couple of slides and talk about gifts. The gift limits in the state of Oklahoma, we'll see some screenshots on the Guardian system really quickly, but I want to get to the gifts. If you are a lobbyist, you can't provide anything to a state official, neither you or your client, unless there is an ethics rule that specifically permits it. Right now, under Oklahoma law, each lobbyist can spend up to $500 themselves for food and beverage for a legislator or a state official working for an agency they lobby. Up to $100, that $500 can be for major life events, marriage, etc. And you can give a trinket gift one time per calendar year. The lobbyist principals themselves can really only host group events, and there are only 4 types of group events. If you'll go to the next slide, it's going to be these 4 events. Really, the first 1, 2, and 4 are the ones that are most common. The second one is bolded in a stronger font for this reason. Recognized caucus events. A lobbyist principal can host a meal for a caucus event, but it has to be for one of the 4 political caucuses at the legislature, which are the House and Senate Republican and Democratic caucuses. All of the other caucuses, rural caucus, prayer caucus, all of those are not going to be one of the recognized caucus events. recognized caucuses for which you can provide meals. It's only those 4 specific caucuses. Let's skip forward to excluded from the definition of gifts. Go forward one more. Are modest items that are given occasionally and not as part of the meal. If you want to provide a state official a bottle of water, a Coke, a donut that's on this slide, randomly, it's not something that you do routinely, maybe for a meeting, that is completely exempted. You don't need to keep track of it. You can, it's probably to your benefit to do so, but you don't have to, and it's not reported to the state. The given occasionally is really important. We had one lobbyist principal when the rules changed that was hosting Cupcake Thursdays at an agency, and that would not meet the definition of given occasionally. If it doesn't meet these definitions, you do need to track it, and it does need to be reported. Next slide, what happens if you violate an ethics rule? What are those violations? It's going to be not registering, not filing on time, filing reports inaccurately or late, and exceeding gift limits. And what happens if that occurs? You can be assessed a fee of up to $1,000, or there can be a formal complaint investigation where if it's prosecuted in a district court, the fines start at $5,000. So it's very important to get that information accurate and to make sure you understand what those rules are, because it can be costly not to. We're short on time. The next few slides really were just screenshots from the Guardian system. So I really won't cover those, except to say when you get this slideshow, I would go through it and look, because reporting on the Guardian system was really intended to be very straightforward. And it is very straightforward. It's really, you click one button and then you're selecting from drop-down boxes to identify what type of gift and then identifying who got it. And that information will be instantly available on the Guardian. And the Guardian maintains a set of statistics that are accessible under the Quick Stats tab that's there on the screen that you can see right in the middle. That has the pie chart that keeps a running total of all the lobbyist gifts, all campaign contributions. And then farther in, it has top 10 lists, what lobbyists are spending the most, etc. So they're really helpful on the maintaining records. And this will be my last thing before, and I'll take some questions, is you have to maintain records of gifts, of records of your lobbying activity for 4 years, for at least 4 years under the ethics rules. And you have to provide those records upon request to the Ethics Commission staff. So make sure you're maintaining those records and be prepared to provide them if you need to substantiate the reports that you're filing with the commission. And so with that, I will stop, and I'll apologize for the hiccups at the beginning on getting the slideshow up, but I'll be happy to take any questions that anybody has.
I have a cynical question.
Okay, excellent.
All that is great for hard money expenditures.
Yes.
Say there's an elected official in Oklahoma who lives and dies by dark money expenditures. How do we know who pays for that? And if that is the case, and I think it is, what's the point of everything you guys have been doing?
So that is honestly one of the reasons that I decided it was probably time for me to leave, is because how you address that, honestly, is you enforce the law. The law is written where you can't do an end run around the ethics rules. Most of that dark money isn't truly bona fide expenditures. It's PACs that are saying they're not PACs to get around registration and reporting requirements when they're supposed to register and they're supposed to report and they're supposed to make that information available. So they're already violating the law by not registering correctly. And so that type of information, the dark money that people don't like, is really already violating the law, and it just needs to be enforced.
Even the individual independent expenditures that supposedly the candidate doesn't know about?
Well, then they're not independent expenditures, right? They're coordinated expenditures. It's a campaign contribution that should be appearing on a contribution report from the candidate, not being reported by the organization. And most of those are going to vastly exceed contribution limits, and a lot of
Oh,
times
yeah.
are going to be a felony because it's also going to be a contribution from a corporation or an association of some type. So that's why I'm saying, like, a lot of the dark money concerns are really, it's not a bona fide corporation out there that's decided to temporarily be involved in advocacy and it's or political expenditures. It's a political action committee that doesn't want to register and wants to be directly involved in making political expenditures, but not have to register who its donors are. Most of those organizations are PACs that should be registered and filing reports.
Thank you. Apologies for the cynicism too.
No, I get it. I fully understand.
Ashley, you got a couple more
Yes.
questions.
There are rumors Oklahoma may lose the Guardian system and go back to paper reporting. Sure. So we were notified right after, within 2 weeks of me notifying my commissioners, I would be stepping down, but before the public announcement was made that the vendor was going to decommission the Guardian system. I had immediately requested from the vendor to keep the system online through February 2025. Started making that argument as soon as I found out about their intended plans to take it off in the middle of an election cycle. Those conversations were slow, but as far as I know, they did finally culminate in an extension of keeping the Guardian system online through February 2025. That gets all the 2024 election information, election reports filed online, and gives the state some time to come up with a funding for a new system, hopefully, or to find some other avenue. But really, it's in the hands of the legislature on whether or not they want to fund a new system. If the funding isn't there, I can say the commission doesn't have the money to be able to fund it independently. It is an expensive system, but right now I do know it will be online at least through February 2025, which should be a huge relief for everybody. And then, is there a guide for advocates on what can be given to legislators? Yes. If you go to the Ethics Commission website and go to the tab for lobbying and guide for lobbyists, it will have all of the gift limits in there. The caveat to that is, if you are not a lobbyist and therefore not subject to those restrictions, does that mean you can provide whatever you want to a legislator? No, there are different rules that apply. If it's being given to a legislator or a state official because of their job title to influence their behavior, that would be considered a misuse of office if they accepted it. So you'll just want to be very careful, but all of that information is available on the Ethics Commission website. Let's see. Do I have any other questions?
Well, Ashley, thank you for taking the time to do this morning.
Absolutely. I'm sorry for the technological issues, but you do have the PowerPoint presentation. If anybody has a question that arises later, you can reach out to OICA. They have my contact information, and they have I'm giving them the authorization to go ahead and share my personal contact information if they need to. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much. And we will have that presentation on our website, and we'll make sure we get that shared. And we're going to move into our next conversation. It's going to be a panel conversation about the different levels of government. We have 4 very esteemed officials with us who are doing great work in their own areas. And I want to start with introducing Christian Reinhardt with the Oklahoma Municipal League, Mark Mann from the Oklahoma City Public School Board, Larry Stein, Oklahoma County Assessor, and Kenneth Korn, the USDA Rural Development Director, and also a former state legislator. Gentlemen, we want to have this panel look at the ways that different levels of government interact. I know when I was in the legislature, one of the questions I would occasionally get was how people wanted to know how I enjoyed working in DC as a state representative. And I didn't tell them I don't go to the nation's capital, I go to the state capital. But the fact they recognized me as a state representative, they just didn't know where I worked. We're not doing a very good job as far as educating people about the different levels of government. I want to turn it over to you guys. We'll start with you, Kenneth, and then we'll go to Larry, and then Mark and Christian.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to join you guys today and give you a little bit of insight. I've had the privilege of working at just about every level of government in my career, and now I'm in the federal government. And I have to say, working in the federal government is much different than working in a state or local governments. Really, in reality, the rubber meets the road at local government. That's probably the area that you see the most impact from government in your lives, from the condition of the neighborhood you lived in, your roads, your bridges, what happens in your schools and things like that. That's all really local level. The interesting thing is at the local level, partnering with your state and national government can do things together. And there are many opportunities that are out there. It's the biggest problem we have is people figuring out who has the authority and jurisdiction over certain things. And then how do you get access to money with all the different programs that are out there? I will tell you at USDA Rural Development, we have over 80 programs. And this is an historic amount of money that's being appropriated right now by the Biden-Harris administration along with Congress. And so it's like drinking from a fire hose to figure out how you get access to that money. And sometimes you have to partner with either your schools, your cities, or your counties to get that money. And so it's a balancing act. So and I can tell you, people who've spent their entire lives in government don't always understand how this all works. So I wouldn't get frustrated by trying to figure it out because some of us who've done it as a career still are trying to figure out every day. It's not as easy as it sounds, but there are opportunities that are out there. But I would tell you, the closer you get to the people, the more likely you're going to feel the impact. And those of us that have worked at the state and national level, it's more in the abstract, if you will. Particularly if you're a legislator, it's more in the abstract. But where things really happen is with your local governments. That's how I would say that.
Thank you, Larry. Larry, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
There we go. I think that should work.
There we go.
Thanks for having me. My concern is that around 4 or 5 counties, maybe 7 counties in Oklahoma, everybody thinks that there's just the big cities, and that's what they're going to rely on. And in 70 counties, 71, 72 counties across the state, people may know their representative and their legislator, but the people they rely on are those in county government. They probably know their county commissioner, they know their treasurer, they know their assessor, they know their sheriff, and their clerks. And for so many across the state, the government that they know and rely on is local county government. But when we get into the big cities, people think that Oklahoma City is all of Oklahoma County, and it's not. There's 19 cities and towns, and each of those have a mayor. They have a city council. They have some of them have sheriffs and law enforcement or deputies, law enforcement, police departments. So, the problem is that when you're dealing with legislators who are predominantly from the metropolitan areas, they really don't know what county government does. And when it's, for instance, the big county jail thing that we're going through right now. People say, well, why doesn't Oklahoma City build a jail? Well, it's not an Oklahoma City jail. They use the county jail. And so when we're looking at where the rubber meets the road, so many people outside of the metropolitan areas realize how important county government is. But then we have the metropolitan areas where legislators continue to look at ways of taking away from the counties the operational funds that we need to be able to do the things that we have to do, like run a jail and provide all the secure records at the courthouse and do the jobs that we have to do, competing with the major industries that are out there paying good salaries. I mean, we effectively are creating a training ground through our sheriff's department when Oklahoma City is out there offering $70,000 for starting police officers and a $10,000 bonus. Well, we bring in hundreds of sheriff's deputies, and we've got a couple of hundred in there, and then they are stolen by the big dollars of big cities in the metropolitan area. And how do we compete with that? when our money is being taken away through diversion programs from the state. They sound like great programs, but they often don't realize the impact on county government. And it's real easy for legislators, and God bless them. They love giving programs of some sort of an exemption, but they rarely realize the impact on a large county like Oklahoma County and the lost revenue. The one good example is everybody wants to help veterans, but the state of Oklahoma doesn't reimburse counties for that lost revenue. In Oklahoma County, we're losing about $4 to $8 million a year in unreimbursed money from the programs the state has done just for veterans. You talk about tax increment financing districts. Oklahoma County's lost hundreds of millions of dollars because we're the only entity of government that isn't reimbursed through that program. So when you step on a balloon, something's going to come up at another location. And oftentimes, sadly, legislators don't understand that. And then when we try to point it out to them, they think we're somehow trying to be against them. No, we're just trying to protect the important services that we're mandated to provide. And whenever you start talking about ad valorem, particularly, that's one of those issues that so many people are unfamiliar with. And I always appreciate those representatives and senators who contact us, because it may not mean anything in a county when there's 1,000 parcels, but in a county where there's 720 square miles and 325,000 parcels worth $92 billion, that impacts us big time.
Thank you, Larry. Mark?
Well, I want to thank you, Joe, and OICA staff for having me on and inviting me here. I think a lot of times when we talk about the functions of government, school board kind of gets left out or forgot about. I think the question that you posed, Joe, was that what do we do about people not understanding and knowing what the different levels of government do? I think that is an issue. I think organizations like OICA and other groups that put whether it's Zoom type meetings like this or in-person meetings, help educate people and remind them of what the different levels of government do and what their roles are is really important. I think that's really the way you're going to have to get people educated on what the roles are. And to Larry's point earlier, and I think Ken even touched on it, everything interacts. I mean, we can't operate a school district without federal funding and state funding, and then we have local ad valorem dollars. The county does a great job with roads and bridges and the function of the county, but they get some help from the state. They get some federal money. So everything is like a machine, and all the gears work together. And I think that's a really hard thing to get people to wrap their minds around. And then the other thing is the roles and how each of these entities operate. So, for instance, the legislature is a deliberative body. You sponsor a piece of legislation, you come in and argue and move things down the road. School board, quite frankly, is not. If you look at state law, the superintendent's in charge of staffing and the day-to-day operations of the district. We're much more like a city council in that we're there to conduct the business of the city. of the school district, and to provide vision and direction. But the implementation and how that gets done is really left up to the superintendent. And I think when you look at county government, as Larry touched on, I mean, so many of the areas of county government aren't deliberative. They're there to provide a function of the sheriff's department or what Larry does at the assessor's office. So people have to understand how, one, all branches interact, and then two, what the role of each branch is and those people that are elected. I mean, are they there as a deliberative body that sets policy, or are they there to set direction and vision and run the business of it?
Christian?
Thanks, Joe. As a lot of the other presenters have touched on, local government like counties and municipalities are really in charge of quality of life of citizens, whether that be water, sewer, trash, fire, police services. I think a lot of times there's some confusion that there's more state oversight than there actually is. And there actually 4 different types of government in Oklahoma for local government. So we've got towns, council manager, aldermanic, strong mayor, and then the 5th one really is charter, so which means that municipality has more options on how they want to run themselves. We get questions all the time at Oklahoma Municipal League. Is there a state agency that has oversight of municipalities? And the real answer is no. There's no one state agency that has oversight of how municipalities operate. The State Auditor and Inspector's Office does do audits and looks into municipalities from time to time. But generally, we're quite a separate form of government than states and counties. We do interact a lot with the state and the national government. For instance, with the American Rescue Plan Act project, I know Kenneth talked about some interactions between grants and the federal government. But with the American Rescue Plan Act project, it was one of the first times in American history where $220 million was given directly to municipalities, and that doesn't include Oklahoma City and Tulsa. They received a lot more funds that were separate from that. With that process, Oklahoma Municipal League worked with the state of Oklahoma and the federal government through the National League of Cities to help distribute those funds to the municipalities, so those funds could be used for quality of life of the citizens. So with that being said, municipalities do interact with state and federal government on as needed to provide the quality of life for citizens.
And I want to stay in that area. I would like to talk about some of the ways that each of the different levels of government interact with the states. And we have, of course, the different avenues of the state. You have working at the legislature to change laws, but also working with each of the executive branch agencies in collaboration to make sure that laws are followed. And we've seen a lot of this in recent years where you have collaborative efforts, especially with federal funds coming in. Christian, you want to go ahead and keep it with you, and then we'll work our way back to Kenneth?
Yeah. So we're just talking about the interaction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. How would the officials basically coordinate together? I know when I was a state lawmaker, anytime a municipal official called me about an issue that might overlap with the state. One example is we worked to secure school land for building an industrial park in one of my communities when I was a lawmaker. Can you talk about just some of the ways that officials work together for their constituents?
Yeah. So, we have a legislative committee at Oklahoma Municipal League. Lots of mayors and city managers are on that. And through that, and even if you're not on the committee, mayors and local officials really need to have the contact information of state officials, the senator, the representative, and talk to them about a bill that they want passed or something that would affect their municipality and the citizens in it. Local leaders really are the boots on the ground, and the state legislators really need to rely on mayors and the local officials for some input on how a bill will impact municipalities and their citizens.
Mark? I know y'all have a lot going on right now.
We have a lot, and I mean, we every year we sponsor a legislative breakfast. We bring our local legislators in. Our board sets a legislative agenda. We've got some priorities. We communicate those to our legislators on a regular basis. When needed on federal issues, we would of course reach out to our congressional delegation or the appropriate federal official. Our board met maybe a year and a half ago when Secretary Cordoba was in town. The U.S. Secretary of Education had an opportunity to sit down and discuss some issues with him. And then, of course, we interact less with the city unless it's things like zoning or where we're going through that right now because we're building 2 new schools. work with the county on school resource officers. I mean, that's pretty much direct. I mean, it's not really a lobbying thing for us, because when we're working with the county, it may be a county commissioner that's going to come in and help us do a road or parking lot project at a school, or it may be getting school resource officers in some of our schools. So it's less of a lobbying and more of just a relationship. And I think we've got good relationships, at least in Oklahoma City, with our county officials, and good relationships with our city officials for the most part. Legislators, obviously some people are more interested in education, so you have more discussion with them on a regular basis than those that are interested in, say, insurance law or whatever. But it's just constantly working to communicate, and everything's about a relationship. Even if somebody disagrees with you, it behooves you to sit down and explain your point of view and work with them, because eventually they may agree with you on something. So I think that's kind of how I see school boards, not just in Oklahoma City, but across the state, how they have, rural or urban, approach things. It's just constantly working with other entities and communicating their point and being a resource when those people call back.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, talking about the way the legislature wants to do things, and God bless them, I appreciate all they do. That oftentimes that tail wagging the dog, particularly having to do with the ad valorem base. It's really the only consistent funding mechanism we have for public schools. And when I explained to legislators, there were a couple of issues this year, and I put together an explanation of a small change that can have extremely large impact. And I think that oftentimes the legislators may not be aware that if you're going to cut funding to one entity, 70 cents out of every one of those dollars you cut is going to come out of public education. And if you support public education, then and I know that if that's the kind of word information that can be provided, that story is going to land, or that memo is going to land on the desk of every corporate site locator in the country, and they're going to have to go tell their employees, yeah, let's go to Oklahoma. They just passed a big tax cut, and 70 cents out of every one of those dollars they cut is going to come out of the public education system. Let's move to Oklahoma, said no one ever. And you don't attract businesses, you don't attract employees to want to go somewhere by telling them the other part of that story. Yeah, we're going to cut taxes, but every one of those tax dollars you're cutting is going to cut money out of public schools right now. We may be able to grow back into it, but when you're talking about cuts, somebody's going to have to get the dirty end of the stick. And oftentimes, because the legislature doesn't deal with it, and I don't want to harp on ad valorem, but as far as the economic impact studies, there are none when it has to do with the Oklahoma County Assessor's Office or any of the other assessor's offices, because they're looking at it from the state. And it can have a huge impact on the ad valorem base at the local level. But because we have legislators that are dealing with the state fiscal office and the Oklahoma Tax Commission, they've got blinders on. They don't even look at what the impact is on the county, because as far as they're concerned, counties don't exist. And that's the saddest part about this whole thing. I mean, we are having cities and towns making decisions and creating unfunded liabilities for the state of Oklahoma that they're unaware of the fiscal impact, and the legislators don't even see the fiscal impact on these major programs that are creating a multiple $1-million obligation for the state to reimburse the counties, and there's no fiscal impact study on these. And it's frustrating from the county level, because there is a fiscal impact on us.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Well, there's really a cascading effect, and I think Larry has alluded to it quite well, how it affects counties. It also affects the cities that you live in. For instance, in Oklahoma, most people don't realize we're one of the few states that only allow municipalities to basically generate revenue through sales tax. So if you're already in economically depressed area of the state, cutting sales tax hits your city budget hard. And that means things like your roads in your community, being able to keep up with services that are necessary to keep your community safe, like police and fire. All those things, kind of get hit hard. And so there is a cause and effect. And sometimes legislators don't really take the full view of what they're doing. They look, Larry's right, at what it does for the fiscal impact of the state budget, but they don't look at what it does for all the other things that come with that, with the local levels. And I can tell you, having been a city manager, sometimes I think the legislature would argue that they're for local control until it's something they don't like. For instance, I think one of the last things that I saw as a city manager that I raised an objection to was allowing people set food trucks up anywhere they wanted to. Well, if I'm living in a neighborhood, I definitely don't want a food truck set up across the street from me and doing commercial business across from my house. And I could never figure out why the legislature was so concerned where food trucks were going to be placed. So from that aspect, the legislature has a lot to say and do that affects all of us, that we have to try to determine from a city level, from a county level, how from the federal level. We do a lot of things from the federal level. For instance, environmental enforcement. While we have the EPA nationally, a lot of those things are handed down to the states. We kind of administer the program from a higher, like a 30,000-foot view. And then there are things done like through the Department of Environmental Quality to handle some things, particularly in the state with the enforcement. So there's a partnership that's there between the state and the federal. Like for instance, at USDA, recently we had an issue with a meat processing facility here in the state. I got a call from the congressman's office about it. Wanted me to see what I could do. Well, first of all, I don't regulate meat processing at rural development. I don't do anything with meat at rural development. But I went out there to see what the issue was, because the city couldn't regulate them because it sat just right outside their city limits. The county doesn't really have zoning requirements, so they couldn't do anything there. And the state said they'd done everything that they could, and then the feds even been out there that regulate and looked and says, well, they're doing what they're supposed to, but it was still creating a smell, a nuisance for the people that lived around it. So I went out there and met with the folks, and we actually have a grant program that we could get them signed up for. One, either through the city could apply for it and help them get the equipment they need to help to abate the smell, or they could apply through another grant we had to help do some things that would reduce their ability to have that nuisance continue on by adding some additional refrigeration for the scraps, basically. So there are ways that we can work together. Sometimes we have to figure out how you work the maze to get it there, because even though government has authority, sometimes government doesn't have authority, and it just gets passed around from one level to the next level. But the way I've always been able to get things done is I just like to get everybody in the room and us talk it out and come up with a plan. And somebody has the authority or has an ability to help at the end of the day.
Good deal. We're getting close to the time. We ran over a little bit on the last one. Do want to come back and just let each of y'all just talk about something that may be going on in the legislature this year that maybe a point of concern or something you think is going to be fantastic. Christian, you want to go ahead and start, and then we'll work our way back to Kenneth?
Yeah, sure. So one of the big things going on at the legislature this year, and almost every year really, is sales tax exemption for groceries. So taking away the state's portion of sales tax on groceries is something that's been proposed for several years, and that would harm municipalities in a lot of ways. Municipalities in Oklahoma are unique in the fact that Oklahoma is the only state that only elects or only allows municipalities to collect sales tax. Other states allow municipalities to collect ad valorem tax, which is a more stable source of income, whereas the sales tax is really volatile because you have some months where people buy lots of things, and other months, like in COVID, where some people did not buy lots of things. So if grocery sales tax is taken off, that will be a huge impact on municipalities and the services that they can provide to their citizens. Even if the state portion is just taken off, citizens are going to ask, well, why am I still paying sales tax when I go to the grocery store? So our concern is that the next thing will be municipal sales tax on groceries. That will be the next thing to be cut. So that's something really big that we're trying to fight this year.
Me? The cities can raise millage rates if they wish. They can raise a millage rate to be able to increase their funding. The dilemma that we face at the local level is that we could be heading for a real crunch because of those cascading effects of things. We've got people that no longer work downtown. When they don't work downtown, then the funding of a bond package to build to pay off a parking garage disappears, parts of it. Then we have the problem with rents for buildings where people are now working from home. They're not buying gas, they're working from home, they're not driving on the streets. We don't have the excise tax to help build the roads. Then we have the other problem of the ad valorem base, which on a huge building, when you take out the core of all the people that are there, the rents go down. The possibility of a challenge on their value can be real. And then we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of company property that they're saying isn't worth what it is. And then couple that with the possibility of having to refinance a loan at 7% or 8% after they had a 3% loan 4 years ago. That's a problem for the ad valorem base. And then what's the legislature going to do if those kinds of things happen? I don't think when we're talking about reducing taxes on sales tax, every city is going to try and take up that sales tax and absorb it. So if we get away from the state sales tax on groceries, that doesn't mean your local governments won't do it. And from Oklahoma County's perspective, the only county in the entire state that doesn't have a county sales tax for the operation and maintenance of our jail, that hurts. And we are struggling to be able to run our jail, find a jail, and compete in the marketplace for employees in the largest metropolitan area in the state, the fastest growing with the fastest growing salaries as well. So, it's when we're looking at all of these different variables that could happen because of the economy nationwide, there are some danger signs, and we all ought to be real careful, because I remember when George and I was governor and everybody locked the oil prices at $60 and $70 and said, let's just cut taxes, it'll be great. And then they all had to bow their heads and cover their tails when they came back in the next session and said, boy, this is terrible. We got to raise taxes again. So it's a very difficult calculation, and it's a Rubik's Cube. And if we're not figuring out where all those colors work out to make it look correct, we could be in big trouble. And ad valorem, particularly commercial ad valorem, could be causing a big, big problem. Remember, Oklahoma County's 22% of the entire state's ad valorem base. About 25% is in commercial real estate in the downtown area. So we need to be real careful, and everybody ought to be looking at every kind of contingency we can. So except for the good news, like that's it.
That's good news. We need to know. Mark?
Well, I think the question that you had, Joe, was, is there anything in particular we're watching at the Capitol or hope happens? I mean, in education, you watch everything constantly because it's an ever-changing process. As you know, and Ken knows, I would say that I know there's been some discussion on the Senate side, and I think the House Education Committee as well, about looking at a teacher pay raise. I think that would be something that would be top of my list. We hear a lot, and we don't hear it out of the legislature. We hear the legislature talk about competing at a regional average, competing with Texas or Arkansas. Well, I mean, that was true 15, 20 years ago when I worked at the Department of Education. It's not true now. We're competing with Boeing and all the suppliers at Tinker Air Force Base and Paycom and all these companies that have moved in or are moving in or expanding. That's where we're losing our people to. We're not losing them necessarily to other states. So we've got to look at teacher pay, and we've got to get teachers paid with a living wage that keeps them in the profession. And then, of course, I'd love to see more money in the funding formula to help operate schools. That would be a blessing. I don't know if we'll get that. I know Senator Hughes talked a little bit about increased education funding, so hopefully he'll get some traction in that area. The thing that troubles me the most is that we still have some people talking about this 0.25% tax cut that equates to, depending on who you talk to, about $97 a family a year, and we're running a little over $2 billion surplus. This could be the session that the state really steps up to the plate and says, we're going to invest in our people. And I don't know. I mean, you can't run government like a business because it's not for profit, no matter what level of government you're at. But you can apply some sound business principles. And I don't know of a nonprofit organization or business out there that's successful and growing and flourishing that does not invest in their people. And the state's no different. We're not going to get where we want to be until we invest in education and healthcare and infrastructure and affordable housing, addressing the homeless problem, and doing it where we're not just throwing it on the back of cities or counties, but really getting out there with some funding to help solve some of these problems. And, just like me or you in our personal budget, when we have an influx of money one year, that's when we look at doing things, whether it's home improvements or doing the things we need to do within our world. State's no different. When we have over $2 billion in surplus and record revenue, that's the time to invest in our people. So hopefully that'll happen. That would be what I would like to see.
Kenneth, you want to close us out?
Sure, mine will be really simple. As a federal employee, I have no concerns with what the state of Oklahoma is doing, and nor can I take a position on anything. But I will tell you, there is a bill in Congress that we in Oklahoma all should be watching very closely, and that's the Farm Bill. It gets reauthorized every 5 years. From a perspective of rural development, as I deal with communities all across Oklahoma, I have some communities that don't qualify for rural development funds simply because a metric that we use called the median household income. So some of the most rural communities in Oklahoma can't get our grant money, and some of the schools can't get our grant money. I mean, really, at rural development, I do everything from hospitals to schools to police and fire to wastewater systems to housing to business loans. And we have areas of Oklahoma that, because of one or two people, based on the population, one or two people with high incomes, skews the number so that it locks those communities out. And by the way Oklahoma is set up, with only the sales taxes funding municipalities, it causes a real problem. And then it spills over to the schools and the other entities in the counties that are there. So that bill is up. So I encourage folks to talk to the members of Congress about making sure that the Farm Bill makes some changes that includes all of Oklahoma and gets these communities the funding they need.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate the work that's being done on that, and thankful Congressman Lucas is in there. I talk with him occasionally about the impact with summer feeding. Thank you for bringing that up. Gentlemen, want to thank you all. I know this was a short one, but I also know y'all are pretty busy with things going on with your own respective governments, and then we're watching attentively what's going to start here in about an hour with the legislature. Thank you all for taking time. I think I'll see most of you on March 12th at our chili cook-off. So
You got it.
Thank you.
Wait. Thanks, Joe.
y'all have a great one. Thank you. And we have another gentleman who you've already met. He was one of our speakers on our very first day. He's back to talk to us a little bit more about another topic. The other speaker texted me. He's running a little bit late. He's tied up in a regents meeting. Former Speaker of the House, Jeff Hickman, who's also a regent. They are tied up in a budget hearing right now, but I want to turn it over to Chris Benge from Oklahoma State University. Chris, just want to talk a little bit about higher education. We've never had a panel really discuss higher education and the interaction, how it ties in with the legislature, because so much of the work that's done used to be tied daily almost to the legislature with tuition increases, and that was changed back in 2004. Just want to talk a little bit about higher education as another kind of similar entity, what we see, but the strongest connections within state government.
Joe, thank you. Let me I guess start, I don't, the budget, the piece of the state budget, well, I guess we can start there because I think a lot of folks probably wonder what the money looks like. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think higher ed anyway is receiving now north of $1 billion out of what probably is now about a $10 billion operation, state appropriation wise. Anyway, the state government's a larger operation than that when you consider all the federal spending, et cetera. And but the state appropriation piece is what I'm more discussing here. Just because that's the key decision piece. Of course, as the legislature kicks off today, the budget it's always the most important thing that we do at the legislature. And so north of $1 billion out of about a 10 billion state spend. So if you want to say about 10%, I think that's probably a good estimate. Higher ed is made up of 26 institutions, I believe, around the state. The regents, who Regent Hickman will represent if he's able to join us on the call, is a constitutional body that was formed and this is where I'm really trying to reach back into my history bank. I want to say it was in the 1940s, but somebody can correct me and I won't be offended if that's the case. But it was created as in the Constitution, and it was done that way specifically to try to insulate higher ed from some of the politics that it could be exposed to otherwise. And that's not to say that politics aren't involved. Politics are involved in anything that touches a state government dollar. So, but with higher ed, our leaders from the past tried to insulate it from some of the politics. So the regents are serve 9-year terms, and they're staggered. And there gets to be a discussion probably every year. I'm assuming it still goes on. Going back to my years serving as the appropriations chair and then Speaker of the House, it was how much direction can you give the regents from the legislative body? And it was always, at least back in my day, a source of tension between the two bodies. I would say mostly it's good tension because I think it's the kind of conversations that are important to be had. And so there begins to be pushback when the legislature at a sort of a micro level begins to dictate how money is to be spent within the higher ed system. The way it typically operates is an appropriation is made to the regents, and there can be some spelling out of how money should be spent, but there's always a line, and I don't know if I could explain exactly what that line is. I just know that there's a point where there's been past tension between the legislature and the regents. That's a little bit of an in the weeds start, but that's hopefully that gives you kind of a rough, Joe, what you're looking for, overview of the regents, and happy to go into further discussion as you would like.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit about the structure of how we have the state regents? And I want Jeff to do this, but he's still not out of his meeting. The state regents, and then we have the different other various regents systems.
Yeah, good question. So the state regents will see whatever state dollars go to any institution of higher ed, it'll go through the state regents in one appropriation. The state regents typically meet the Friday of sine die, I believe, and begin to disperse those dollars out to the different institutions. So, for example, with Oklahoma State has its own board of regents that will receive an appropriation from the state regents, and then the Oklahoma State regents will begin to disperse those monies throughout the the OSU system. OU has its own board of regents. And then you have something called RUSO, which is a regional, it stands for the Regional University System. It's made up of the northeastern states, the southwestern, I think UCO, southeastern, I believe is in that. So it's a conglomeration, I guess, of the regional universities that fall under the RUSO board. And then some of the other universities that are outside of those three bodies have their own regents. TCC, I'll pick as an example, Tulsa Community College has its own board of regents. So you have the big board of regents, and then you have other regents that have fiduciary responsibilities and governing responsibilities over the other individual institutions.
Could you talk a little bit about the appointment of regents, how they're selected?
Gubernatorial appointments, the governor is able to appoint those. I think all the regents. I don't know, but I'm trying to think of an example where one's not, but I think they're all appointed by the governor. They're longer terms. I think there are some that are 7, but as I mentioned, I think the state regents are a 9-year term, and has to go through the Senate for confirmation. So the governor, the way it'll work is when an appointment's coming up, the governor will put someone forward. It'll go through the Senate process of confirmation, whatever that is, which is typically assigned to, I think, the Education Committee in the Senate, where those appointments will be examined for their consent. And I don't know what I think it's rare that the Senate does not confirm, but there's probably, I know there's been occasion where the Senate has not confirmed a gubernatorial appointment, but that's the way it works.
Thank you. And then wanted to touch a little bit about Higher Ed Day and some of the activities of what the universities have to interact with lawmakers, maybe inside and outside of the Capitol.
Well, there'll be a lot of people, a lot of folks representing the higher ed on the Higher Ed Day Thursday. How many, I'm not sure. They've typically pretty much filled the Capitol, and it's a good opportunity for employees or faculty or people that are associated with the higher ed system to get to interact individually with their legislators, and talk about the needs of higher ed, and have that personal interaction. There's usually, I assume it'll be the same case this year, I think, although I have not seen an itinerary. They'll usually have displays in the rotunda of the different campuses or universities, so that they can maybe have some either literature or some hands-on demonstrations, sometimes even about what's going on in the higher ed world. I think it's going to be interesting, Joe, going forward, because I haven't been to one of these in a while. But as higher ed is asked to become more workforce oriented, I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of those conversations look like, as well as demonstrations. I mean, I think for OSU IT, for example, here, we're an advanced technology campus, a campus that does hands-on as well as academic learning. Most of our degrees are associates of applied science, so there are 90 credit hours, and there are already internships embedded in those programs. But our students do lab work as well as academic work, and the system is being asked to do more of that. I believe, at least I see that as the national trends, where we're being asked to. This might sound a little. I don't want this to sound too grandiose, but I think America is being asked to work again, as in hands-on manufacturing, the reshoring of our products that we know we need to make here in America. And I think a lot of those kind of trends are driving conversations in the higher ed circles as well. You layer onto that the discussion over the past decade or so, where we've found that more students come out with large amounts of debt that it takes them many years to pay off. Sometimes they're misaligned with their expectations for what they want their career to be. Higher ed is going back and working to address some of those past issues. That's the skills gap you hear mentioned a lot, and you see the regents at all levels trying to refocus and adjust to where we can deliver products or education opportunities that are short term in nature, where you'll hear terms like micro credentials and certificates and things where a person can go and get training in a specific area for maybe a 6 or 8 week period, and can stack those credentials to where there is a value that may not be a degree. It's just something different that's more specifically geared toward their career choice. So you see that shift, and I would want to say, because I want to make sure I take the opportunity to mention, if you all have not gotten to know Dr. Casey Shrum, our OSU president, I would certainly encourage you to get to know her and what she's about. She's been at OSU now for 2 years, leading OSU for a little over 2 years. And all of these trends that I'm trying to get out on the table here, she has specifically a focus on. And I think you're going to hear more about, for example, trying to avoid those large college debt, those experiences where students come out with a lot of college debt and find themselves frustrated at being able to pay off their debt and be able to get the real reward out of their career choice that they had hoped. And I can't think of anything more discouraging myself if coming out being excited about starting your career, and then kind of the realization sets in that you've got to pay off this debt for multi-years. And we're trying to avoid that, at least at OSU. Joe, I probably went beyond what you actually asked in the beginning, but I wanted to add some of that color to the conversation. You're on mute.
I've been doing that for the last hour. No, I greatly appreciate that. That was wonderful. Regent Hickman joined us. Jeff, do you have any words of wisdom? Chris pretty much covered everything for you.
He always does. So I'm happy to answer any questions about anything he said.
Well, we covered basically how the higher ed interacts with the legislature and government, the system of funding, how regents are appointed, higher ed day coming up. So we've covered a lot of bases.
I'll tell you, I just the reason that I'm late joining you is we were having a meeting of a new regents committee to start examining our funding formula. What we are finding in other states that's different than here is that there's a much larger percentage of higher education funding in other states that's at risk from year to year, that incentivizes student performance, incentivizes institutions to pursue those priorities that align with student success and students being able to see value from their college degree. And so we are starting that process here, working with the Lumina Foundation and a consultant that they just completed. This organization just completed an overhaul of the community college funding formula in the state of Texas, that people seem to be really excited about as well. But we really haven't had a true deep dive into our funding formula. Historically in Oklahoma, it's been how much did you get last year? And you'll get that amount this year. And if there's some new, we'll sprinkle it around. And we've not really had a straightforward funding formula, and probably Speaker Benj would share when he was in the legislature, as did I. It wasn't really easy to understand. The Constitution, rightly so, says the legislature allocates those dollars to the state regents, and they are to allocate those dollars to the institutions to remove some of the politics. Although it seems like over the years, with the governor appointing regents, as Speaker Benj would have shared with you earlier, some politics has entered back in, and maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to say inequitable, because I don't know that that's the right word, but I don't know that the allocations went out in a way to ensure student success at all of our institutions, to account for the differences in institutions. And so that is our big project that we are just beginning. And I think something that we've not done a very good job of historically is engaging our institutional regents. I'm sure Speaker Benj talked about the state regents being the overarching board, and then the institutions, some falling under a board with other institutions, some having their own. All of our two-year colleges, with the exception of those that fall under the Oklahoma A&M board, have their own board, while our regional universities share a board, and OU and OSU's board govern multiple institutions. We've not done a good job of engaging some of those regents individually in conversations with the state regents and funding priorities and state priorities. And so I think you're going to see more of that, as the state regents right now are very interested in engaging our institutions. And why does all this matter? It matters, at least to the state regents, because we want to make sure we can ensure our access points remain open. And so a lot of the talk about the future of higher education has involved efficiencies in terms of joint ventures between institutions, whether those are full mergers and consolidations or they're just shared services. But the purpose of all of those things, even when you talk about some board consolidation, the purpose of all of those things is not to close an institution. It's just the opposite, to ensure they can survive in the future with the limited resources that we have. And so that is our goal, is that things may need to change in order to make sure those access points can remain open and available to students, regardless of their zip code, where they live, and what part of the state, rural, urban, wherever they may be.
Fantastic. Want to open it up if anybody has any questions before we start on the next conversation. And Jeff, I know you've been on our closing panel sometimes. That's an open invitation if you want to do it again this year, if you have time.
Sure. Can you tell me exactly what time the governor will end his address, and I'll hop on? Is there a pool? Are there bets of what time that speech will end on the dot?
Normally there will be a pool, but this year we've been a little busy. We've had a phenomenal conference so far. This is the final day, as y'all are aware, and it's been a very learning experience. I've learned a lot, and I appreciate it, especially with this one. You're right. You serve out there for 12 years, and there are just so many different aspects that you truly don't get to delve into as a lawmaker. Even the ones you want to try and specialize in, there's just so much to learn.
It will be interesting for us, and I know Senator Gum, I see, is on here, and Speaker Benj, and you, Representative Dorman, to some years higher education is mentioned in the State of the State speech as a priority of the governor. Some years it isn't. And then obviously, once the governor presents his budget to the legislature, sometimes it's a guiding principle. Sometimes it goes on the shelf to collect dust, and the legislature does their job of building the budget, and they send it to the governor when it's all said and done. So it will be interesting to those of us that now work with higher education to see if it's mentioned as a priority with the governor, or what thoughts he has on higher education, if it's part of this address today, and to kind of know, at least see his cards, so to speak, and then see where the legislature takes us over the next 4 months.
Generally, the most fascinating part of the speech is what is said, and sometimes what is not said. And you're right. We've seen some years where there's not even been a mention of higher education, along with children's issues. Several years, we felt that children's policies haven't been addressed sufficiently enough, but that's where that increases that workload to make sure that we're out there with the legislature and keeping that top of mind. It's like you're both off the hook.
I see Senator Griffin's here too, so we're she may have a wager on whether it's mentioned or not, and what direction we go.
We're talking about higher ed. Will it get a mention in the speech today?
I'm going to guess higher ed funding won't be mentioned. May mention higher education, but yeah.
I would bet there's going to be something. I think one of you touched on this about the association of late of higher ed with workforce development. I think Chris, you mentioned that. I know that's been a topic, and I bet there will be something along those lines.
Yeah, it seems like, and Regent Higman can speak to it more in depth, but this focus on critical occupations seems to be getting traction, I guess, as far as legislative funding and kind of understanding that concept that, you have a certain, there are certain occupations that are of great need. And I know just to start it off, it's been a focus on teachers, education, or educators, nurses, and engineers, I believe. So I could see that getting more attention again this year.
It didn't get a lot of press. It was very unusual. I don't know that I remember the last time it happened, but the governor attended a regents meeting, not a state regents meeting. He attended a meeting of the regents at Eastern Oklahoma State College a couple of weeks ago, actually. And he's been having conversations with Carl Albert State College and Eastern Oklahoma State College, or at least with some of the regents he's appointed, about more ways that they can work together, merge, consolidate, better serve students, gain efficiencies, et cetera. So it was a long way from Oklahoma City. He made the trip. Not a lot of press made that trip, and so you didn't hear much about it. But I'm really curious to see if that comes up in today's address, simply because I don't remember the last time a governor went particularly to a regents meeting of a junior college in the state. So I just thought it was very interesting. I'm not sure where that's headed, but I just am curious to see if that has anything to do with what we hear today, or if it was just a visit, if he decided to be in that part of the state that day.
Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to be here with us today. I felt this was a really good addition to have, because so many people don't understand how higher education works and the structure of government. And I think this shed a lot of light on the system. So I want to thank you both. All right, we're going to have AJ Griffin, aforementioned former senator, who is also our current advocacy committee chair. And we also have Alex Adkins, who is one of our government relations contract employees that works at the Capitol. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the bills that are coming up in the legislative session from a kid's perspective. We don't focus a lot on children's policy throughout this conference because it's supposed to be on the legislative policy, but we do want to make people aware, because all of y'all have some tie to children's policies, and just want to bring up some of the bills that we're tracking. Alex had mentioned there were several thousand bills that are in the works right now, and OICA is tracking about 650, and it's about an even split of bills that were carried over from last year to bills that are filed for this year. In fact, we've got a meeting at the Capitol at 9:30 in the morning with a lawmaker who's working on a bill. So I want to turn it over to both of you. Alex, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'll just say hi. I'm Alex Atkins. I am with ANA Advocates, and so I get to lobby for the wonderful OICA, which is always wonderful, to speak on behalf of children's issues at the Capitol. As Joe said, there are about 4,800 bills floating around right now, probably about 4,700 too many, but that's okay. Session kicks off this afternoon with the State of the State at 12:30. And as Joe mentioned, we are tracking about 600 to 700 bills pertaining to children. And so I've just kind of broken down a few different topics to cover from there. But would love to, hear from Joe and AJ what they want to hear about first.
I'm going to defer to the boss.
Just dive right in there, Alex.
Okay, let's do it. Well, we all know that taxes and anything financial is going to be a big topic of the session, but related to that is childcare. because we know that childcare is a workforce issue. The state chamber said that explicitly today. And so a couple of bills that I want to highlight there, and I'm really just going to highlight new bills. But then if there's a carryover from last year that is a companion, I'll mention that as well. So related to childcare and family leave, House Bill 3272 is by Representative Baker, which allow, as you know, last year we did maternity leave for state school employees, and so this would allow maternity leave to be done for adoption of a newborn, as well as a newborn baby. And there is also one that adds maternity leave 6 weeks to higher ed. We just heard a lot about higher ed, and so that's Senate Bill 1278 by Senator Garvin that would extend that same maternity leave that we have in our K through 12 to our higher ed programs as well. There's Senate Bill 1315 by Senator Pugh, which would allow school employees to use maternity leave for adoptions. And then Senate Bill 1496 and House Bill 4147, which is a shell right now, but we've heard there is language coming. Both of those will be tax credits related to childcare to businesses that either provide assistance to their employees, childcare on site, or reserve spots under House Bill 4147. And then Senator Pugh's 1496 is a tax credit for expenses related to childcare facilities on site. So just trying to incentivize our workforce by providing childcare, which we know ever since the pandemic and even before was a huge issue in Oklahoma. And so childcare is something, it's really good to see that be a hot topic of the session, especially as we're looking at taxes and financial means, workforce, commerce, things like that, noting that childcare is an important piece of that. I will move over to some of our services and food insecurity bills we are talking about. And if anybody has any questions, please just jump in. There are no rules. So there are a couple of bills to allow DHS to have sort of a universal electronic enrollment for certain services. There's House Bill 3235 by Representative Lawson, and he authors a lot of the bills that were done by the Child Welfare Task Force that just completed. So he's got some great bills out there to keep an eye on, and we're going to highlight some more of those. And then Senator Thompson has 1324, which is a universal application for school lunches, for free and reduced school lunches that will be available online that everybody can apply to throughout the state. There's a lot of good discussion about school lunches. As we know, it was a hot topic last year, as well as over the interim. And there is Senate Bill 1220 by Senator Hicks to provide no-cost meals for up to 250% of the federal poverty level. There is the Thrive Act, Senate Bill 1363 by Senator Garvin, which is a cost reimbursement to schools that have a high percentage of free and reduced school lunches. And then she also has Senate Bill 1473, which creates a farm to school fresh produce program. And then over back in the House, Representative Moore has House Bill 3461, which would require the legislature to appropriate funds to the State Department of Ed to provide breakfast for schools. And then a couple of other things to note over there. There are discussions about making sure that our youth are able to access their needed documents. House Bill 3591 is by Representative Hill, and that ensures that kids coming out of OJA custody are able to get their necessary documents. There's also House Bill 3231 by Representative Lawson, which assists homeless youth in getting IDs that are needed. And there's a similar one, House Bill 3809 by Representative Dollins, which is not specific to children, but also relates to homeless identifications and notes that those will be free of charge through shelters and social workers. Moving on to healthcare. I know I'm throwing a lot of bills at you, but that's how it goes in the first couple of weeks of session. Representative Rowe has a bill related to free period products in schools. That's another hot topic that we're seeing this session, which is really, really exciting to see people getting period poverty and impacting our students. So there, Representative Rowe has one, 3329. Senator Young has one, Senate Bill 1271. Senator Stanley has one, Senate Bill 1285. That's a grant program for the Department of Ed. Then, yes, there's also 1499, which is by Senator Garvin. That's a feminine hygiene fund sales tax exemptions for nonprofits that purchase those products. And then we also have one I want to note, as you guys know, we're starting the transition this week to the managed care process in Oklahoma, enrollment on Thursday. And so Representative McIntyre has House Bill 3367, which impacts the children's specialty plan. And so this bill notes that it will cover all kids in DHS custody, as well as continuing that coverage throughout the unification process. So ensuring that there's no gaps in coverage for our youth. And then Senate Bill 1449 is by Pro Tem Greg Treat, which provides an appropriation to the State Department of Health for perinatal services. So some good stuff happening on that. And then Senate Bill 1921 is one I want to note from our friends at the American Heart Association that relates to school coaches and the training and developing of a cardiac emergency response plan for some of our student athletes, and ensuring that their health is always important on and off the field. A couple that I want to note, we have a couple of carryovers here that I want to highlight. So one that we have a carryover bill from last year, but this has been newly filed, is House Bill 3836, is Handle with Care, something we've been working on for many years. And as I'm sure has been talked about today, sometimes politics gets in the way of good policy. And so a couple of these bills I'm going to highlight have had really successful policy, but have gotten caught up in the legislative process, which happens extremely unfortunately. But this bill, Handle with Care, would allow school personnel to be notified and have a process to follow if a student needs a little extra care that day through maybe law enforcement involvement at the home the night before, things like that, just to make sure the student and the teacher are armed to be able to better serve that child if they've had a tough situation. Also, Senate Bill 1924 by Senator Floyd is another bill that was filed last year and continuing discussion this year. This is the one that prohibits corporal punishment on students with disabilities. It has been a shockingly controversial topic at the Capitol in both the House and the Senate, which, as we all know, OICA, of course, does not want to see corporal punishment on children, much less children with disabilities in schools. So it's something we are very passionate about and continuing to work on. There is still a little bit of pushback, and so we'll be working closely on that one when we're very, very, very closely monitoring. I also want to highlight House Bill 3295, which is tied to a carryable bill from last year, House Bill 2102. That's the Hope Schaefer Act. Another bill that had really successful policy and was chugging right along finally, and then we hit a political standoff in the Senate. And so it was a casualty of politics. We are continuing the discussion. We went ahead and filed a new bill, but hope to move last year's bill instead. It just needs the enacting date changed, and it's ready to go to the Senate floor. So that is the Hope Schaefer Act. The Schaefer family is extremely close to OICA, and I consider them personal friends of mine. Their daughter, Hope, passed away tragically in a car accident related to driver's ed. Her parents were not informed that she would be riding in the car with another student driver that would be driving. And so this bill just requires that students who are enrolled in driver's ed, if there will be another student driving them, their student will be a passenger, that the parent or guardian be notified. So it's just ensuring that our parents and our guardians at the state are informed, because obviously driver's ed is stressful. You do assume the risk of your child learning to drive, but making sure that you're informed if another unlicensed driver will be driving your child around. And then another policy bill I want to note is Senate Bill 1425 by Senator Peterson. This is a new bill that would require 6 hours of counseling be made available to foster parents and non-foster children in foster homes, to ensure that the families are getting some counseling support if they want it, along with the children that are directly in the foster care system. And I think that is all of them, now that I've rambled through numerous bills. Are there any questions I can answer? Other topics we'd like to discuss?
And I'll add on, Blake asked a question. If this list is created, we'll share it. We will have this on our website. We post the overall list minus the OICA comments and where we're taking a position on some of these. We will frequently update throughout the year because the bills can change. We don't want an old list that may have a bill with a negative rating. Amendments might fix the problem and it become a positive rating. So we will issue action updates throughout the session on key pieces of legislation that we're following and trying to either see passed or get slowed down a little bit. So we'll make sure that we keep that information available for everyone once our advocacy committee has time to go through and decipher some of the language. Madam Chair?
But I wanted to highlight a couple of other kind of movements that we have. Both Representative Glossop and Senator Garvin also have language around uniform application for benefits, and having discussions with the Department of Human Services about that. I think that we'll see something happen. That isn't something that requires legislation, but when legislators are interested in it, I think we're going to see some progress there. Representative Hefner has a bill on community health workers, not directly related to children's policy, but an expansion of access to community health workers, which I think we're going to see.
Oh, we lost you, AJ.
I think we'll see there as well.
I can barely hear you. Somehow your volume got turned down.
Oh, so let's try this again. And I do want to let you know too that POTS we're of course tracking all the early childhood things specifically within children. So we've got multiple groups looking at legislation this year.
I know we've been working with Representative Archer, Senator Dossett, and others on paid family leave. I know that's going to be a topic of conversation this year, and we have a couple of bills that are filed in that avenue, and I believe Senator Kurt is filing some legislation that would look at different opportunities as well as other lawmakers. So I know that's going to be a key piece that we'll monitor and most likely engage. I'll let y'all know the OICA, the way that we work on this, we have Fall Forum, our fall policy conference that helps us shape our legislative agenda. We hear from the advocates about what policies are the most dire in consequence and what we need to try and immediately shape based upon those conversations. Lawmakers are chairing those conversations as we're going through the process. And from our legislative agenda, we work with lawmakers to see legislation filed and then also watch what bills are filed by lawmakers. And that's how we come to our legislative list. And then we tie that, cross-reference it with our legislative agenda. And that's where we will focus most of our bills. So if there's a policy you're concerned about, we want you at Fall Forum this year. I want to open it up for questions. Like I said, most of y'all are tied in some form or fashion with child advocacy, working with children's policies. I just want to open it up, see if anyone has any comment or if you have any questions. Got about 9 more minutes before the legislature is to officially convene. They will go through some of their work, and then the state of the state will most likely kick off at 12:30. We'll have a break, probably about a 30-minute period of time for everyone to go grab something to eat or grab some food, bring it back to your computer. We will have the state of the state broadcast through this Zoom link where you can watch it. And then we will immediately follow that conversation with a panel discussion about what was said, what was not said, and points. I do want to include in here, this is my weekly column. For those of you all who get your local newspaper, my columns run in several newspapers around the state, but I'm going to do a screen share and show you our website so you can navigate that. And it's going to change soon. We're going to have a brand new website that will be up soon. If you ever want to go through here, this is where you can see our history and our annual reports. This is the news releases that we put out. And this is where the weekly columns are at. If my column's not running in your local newspaper, talk to the editor. We send it out to everybody. And so this helps us get the word out to individuals weekly about what is happening at the Capitol, or what's happening in children's issues around the state. This is where we have our events, advocacy. The legislative learning lab materials will be here for when you want to go back and review that, as well as the videos. We also have our children's legislative agenda and the scorecard of what we do to grade lawmakers on their votes on children's policies. And I'll tell you, the lawmakers get a 5% bump if they file a positive bill dealing with children. A lot of lawmakers file bills, but they sometimes can't get their bills heard. But we want to recognize them for going to that extra effort, especially in the House when you're limited to 8 bills. There's our different awards links, and we're building that. We're getting that updated with more of the awards we have. And here's ways you can get involved. John, I see you had a question.
Well, I just want to say, I know I've been talking a lot, but I just want to make it clear what the reason I've been asking these questions is that I've been wrestling with the idea, how can we institutionalize the greatness that we've seen at the Institute of Child Advocacy and the Potts Foundation and places like that. And, and that's the reason why I've been jumping in so much, is I'm trying to make sense out of what you're all, well, I've already known on the excellence there, but trying to think in terms of how we can expand that into other institutions that are slipping. I just wanted
OICA's, we're here as a resource for children's programs. We want to keep them aware of what's going on. We also want to equip them with the tools, what they need to get engaged themselves, and provide those resources so they can share their message at the Capitol. March 12th is our next event. It's our Child Advocacy Day at the Capitol. We do a chili cook-off on the back row of the south parking lot. We like for youth programs to come set up a table, cook a pot of chili, and then promote the work they're doing and use it as a networking event with lawmakers. And so any organizations want to do that, the link is on our website. Please go sign up, come participate. We will have a stock card for individuals to pass out information inside to the lawmakers about our critical bills that we're watching at that point in March. And it's ways that people can get more involved. We encourage them to bring information about bills that impact their own areas or an area of interest they might have. And so we want to be there as a resource to help people better understand the process and how to navigate the legislature to accomplish goals. That's one of the reasons we created this conference about 4 years ago, to give people the opportunity to learn more about the systems. We certainly want people to get more engaged. As Jay mentioned earlier, sign up for our newsletter. If you are not receiving our newsletter, just drop an email to him at jpgum@oica.org, jpgumm, and he will make sure that you get signed up for our newsletter. On the new website, we're going to have a bar on there where it's going to be easier to sign up for the newsletter.
Joe, Charlotte Cooper, I still haven't figured out where I raise my hand. It doesn't seem to be on my screen. Could you go back to the Fall Policy Forum? Is that just for staff and related people, or can us activists come and hear your conversation about what you're focusing on, what your greatest concerns are, that kind of thing? So when we talk to our legislators, we're ready.
Absolutely. The more the merrier. This is open to anyone. One of the things we do, we work really hard to get sponsorships so we can keep the conferences affordable, because a lot of advocates, it's tough for them to take off time from work as well as to afford a ticket. We always keep these tickets under $100 for individuals for multi-day events. Fall Forum is 3 days in person, 1 day virtual, compared to the Learning Lab, which is 3 virtual days, 1 day in person. So we do the Learning Lab virtually because it's easier to get the individuals together, and we don't really want to pull people away from their jobs that much during a calendar year. So we feel it's very important for the advocates to be there in person at the Learning Lab, to meet those lawmakers that chair those sessions, and to network with other youth-serving organizations. It's amazing the connections that I've seen developed at Fall Forum, where individuals learn about other groups that may have similar passions, and then they develop those collaborative efforts together. So the more the merrier. We do have
So
a
is
question.
there is there a written report on that event for those of us who can't be out for 3 days?
Absolutely. Our legislative agenda we put on the website. It's basically the synopsis of the policy findings and what we encourage lawmakers to look at. If you go back to our website, oica.org,
Yeah,
you can look on there under advocacy and you can see our children's legislative agenda from last session.
great. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Donna asked a question about Senate Bill 1924. I believe that's Kay Floyd's second corporal punishment bill. We have the tally bill from the House that is a carryover piece of legislation. And then Senator Floyd filed Senate Bill 1924 as a companion bill to try and take the language back to what we started with. Yes, that is on OICA's list for support.
Hey, Joe, actually the legislative agenda that's up there now is the one for this year that we developed at the last fall forum that's good for 2024. And the legislative scorecard is the one from the last legislative session, which of course we'll be doing this year's legislative scorecard in the month of June, early July, after the session is over.
And Jay's taken over the policy director duties here at OICA, and he's going to be monitoring the bills, watching the votes for the scorecard, and keeping track of what's happening in committee, working closely with A&A advocates, and then making sure that those updates are given to our advocacy committee so we can keep track in real time of what's happening and make sure that we update the legislation if it moves from one category to the other. And anytime you want us to come speak to an association, we are more than happy to do that, or a civic organization. I spoke to the Okeen Kiwanis Club in December, going out talking to them about our children's legislative agenda. So if you have organizations that would like for us to come and do a presentation about either the legislature, what we're doing, or the mission of what OICA has, we're always happy to do that. And it looks like the legislature is in